Hello everyone, and welcome to another series of Surgeons Wealth Summit, where we come together to truly explore what it means to live a life of balance, freedom, and purpose. At Apta, we talk often about building financial independence through smart, conservative real estate investments. But wealth in its truest sense is multidimensional. It's not just about how much you've accumulated, it's about how much of your life you're actually able to enjoy. And that's why we created the Surgical Wheel of Wealth. It's a framework that reminds us that time, impact, and health all matter as much as financial growth. Because let's face it, what good is passive income if you're too exhausted, in pain, or too unhealthy to enjoy it? Which brings us to today's special conversation set here in Eden, Utah, on the slopes of Powder Mountain. I want to take a moment to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Powder Haven team, as well as our team for setting this up. We're honored to be joined by two of the co-founders of 10Squared, a company that is redefining what it means to move well, age powerfully, and invest in your health span, not just your lifespan. So with us today are Dr. Luke Bennett, who is the CEO and co-founder of 10Squared, along with Dr. Peter Attia and Dr. Kyler Brown. Luke is a former intensive care and emergency aeromedical retrieval doctor from Australia. He most recently led the performance division of Hinsa Performance, a Swiss-Finnish company delivering medical and performance services to the teams and drivers of Formula One World Championships. Luke worked directly with 31 active F1 drivers over 9 dominant seasons, and drivers or teams under Luke's care won a total of 17 Formula One World Championships. Having bonded with Peter Attia over their mutual love for Formula One over many years, he was delighted to join Peter and Kyler in Austin as the ideas around 10Squared began to take shape in 2023. Kyler specializes in bridging the gap from post-surgical rehabilitation all the way back to high performance, and this is connected perfectly into his current mission at 10Squared, guiding people to train with intent for what Peter Attia calls the centenarian decathlon. 10Squared delivers highly personalized remote hybrid fitness and movement programming for people who want to feel as good as they perform in business and life and well into the decades ahead. 10Squared is focused on the preparation for middle and older age with the planning and specificity of a dedicated athlete. Their mission aligns beautifully with ours to help high-achieving professionals create a future that's not just successful, but sustainable, energized, and fully lived. So whether you're here looking to move better, live longer, or simply stay sharp and strong for the people and passions that matter most, this conversation is for you. Please join me in welcoming Luke Bennett and Kyler Brown from 10Squared. Hello, Kyler, Luke. Good
Awesome.
To have you guys here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really looking forward to having a meaningful conversation about topics that, all three of us are really passionate about. Hopefully share with our audience some valuable insights into things that they can do in their own lives to really bend the needle and improve the quality of life on multiple levels. So I thought I'd share just a little bit of the backstory for our audience about how we met. And this story is, deeply personal to me. After my father passed away, it really caused me to reflect very deeply about longevity and not just about living longer, but living fuller and being very, very intentional about how we live. I saw my father's downhill slide, and the domino that really tipped that off was just a lot of back, spine, and neck pain that began a whole series of deterioration in his health and mental status and led to some, unhealthy practices. And so I really wanted to learn from that. And it caused me to kind of explore this new journey. And I've been following 10Squared, and I loved the kind of no frills, just data-driven, scientific, personalized methodology. So I joined the wait list, and Luke reached out. And so on our first conversation with Luke, it really struck me that there was a real genuine interest. And I didn't realize at that point that Luke had already been vetting me, and he was very curious about what we were doing at Apta in terms of helping physicians reduce their dependence on clinical income and find more fulfillment and balance in their life and through conservative real estate investments. And so that prompted a discussion, and that conversation led to another conversation, multiple conversations and emails, and eventually we met for dinner in Austin. And what struck me was that we were two physician-found groups who were simply sharing how they solved their own personal problems and sharing that with a greater audience and having a very aligned mission. Looking at longevity from a different perspective, but still playing the same game about how to live life fuller and intentional and with surgical precision. So, anything you could add to that, Luke, that I missed?
I think that's a really nice summary, Vasu. And I would say the 10 Squared program is a significant investment, not the least of which is an investment of time. And so we do take our time to get to know our prospective members well. And I do remember that our early conversations were a little different in that way. It was clear that you had thought very deeply about not just health span, living a meaningful life, but something somewhat deeper than that. Certainly wrapped up in not just physical wellness, not just career, but all of the other things that make family important. And that resonates very closely with the 10 Squared model. We haven't had too many physicians through, and I was intrigued to collaborate with you on that level. And then I looked a little bit further into Apta as well, and it was clear from the kind of investments that you make, the structures that you guys have put in place, that you've approached this in a very, very deliberate way. It's clear that the heart of your model is very much about these goals that you've set, this meaning that you have driving what you do. It's not about flash and presentation. And I was really gratified to have you as one of our founding members, having invested that time getting to know each other.
That's certainly alignment of missions makes a huge impact in terms of improving genuine connections and authenticity. So I'm just curious if each of you guys would want to share a little bit about your own longevity journey and how that relates to the founding and birth of 10 Squared.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way I found the longevity space and looking at how people evolve long term, it's always through my background as an injury rehab specialist lens. So what I would always see is people where they got injured and then they try to figure things out. And it doesn't matter if you're a professional athlete or a surgeon who needs their body or even a ski instructor. We all need our bodies to function. And a lot of people are willing to put in long hours and hard work to gain an income and provide some sort of financial freedom from themselves. But they don't really take into account how important it is that their body is a part of that journey. And all the pro athletes I've worked with, especially the ones that had long careers, they didn't just pursue the short-term, high output, high performance stuff. They also did a lot of things that was fundamental recovery and really balancing out their system. And I think always seeing people from that injury lens really taught me early on that there's so much more we can do earlier in people's timelines that set them up for success much later in life. And so I've always been really passionate about that. I used to always say my dream scenario would be a 15-year-old who's a collegiate or hopefully even pro kind of aspirations. They come to us and look for trouble. They look for signs of things we can do from a macro plan standpoint. And that's why I've been really excited to do this at 10 Squared, because deliberate's a really good actionable word. We are looking at everything, and we're not just looking for this weekend. We're looking at how can we set people up for success over the long haul and how it can be incredibly custom for them.
Anything you'd add, Luke?
I think my answer to that question's somewhat different. As someone who was an intensive care doctor at a busy capital city hospital and then an error medical retrieval doctor, deep in sort of complicated emergency scenarios, I honestly couldn't have been less interested in longevity and well-being and long-term preventative health. So that world came to me somewhat accidentally almost, through working almost as a weekend hobby, doing trauma rescue for motorsport events. I ended up fortuitously in Formula One and in managing not just these athletes, these drivers, in terms of their own physical performance, managing the teams around them, thinking about this incredible traveling circus that Formula One remains today, sleep, nutrition, crazy travel schedules, and indeed emotional well-being. There was a real mentoring relationship within the Formula One paddock to being everybody's doctor, not least of which for these young drivers coming through. So as I took that journey, I could see that there was a real value in this long-term preventative approach. Our model for the company I worked for, Hinsa Performance, aligned quite significantly with the sorts of frameworks that Peter Attia has long been using in his medical practice. Peter and I got to know each other through that Formula One journey, through his enthusiasm for the sport. But and in addition to all of that, turning 50 myself and starting to approach this part of life where these themes become really very, very real. They become very resonant, and it's when you start living the need for health, the longevity piece comes closer and closer on the horizon. It's of course the most valuable thing you can invest your time and attention in.
It's really kind of ironic that as healthcare providers, we spend so much time and energy caring for others and pour our heart and souls into our patients, and then oftentimes forget to take care of ourselves. So, Luke, I'm just really curious as to how do you connect the dots about how to match your wealth span with your health span?
Well, beyond the really obvious point that money kind of makes everything in life easier, and that poor health is very well correlated with poverty, I would say at 10Squared, we think about a term that Peter coined called the marginal decade. This is central to our model. So the marginal decade, the last 10 years of your life, a time that none of us really know when we're entering that phase, but this should be a time where you have some freedom from work commitments. You've hopefully accumulated some financial assets. You have time, you have the ability to travel, grandchildren. It should be really a golden era of life. And if you're physically debilitated or physically limited, that can instead turn into a time of great frustration, really. So the wealth is certainly a big piece of having a satisfactory marginal decade. But the investment in your health up to that time, I think, is also a critically important part of both health span and wealth span.
And I'd also say there that, you don't arrive there by accident, right? You have to put the work in. And more importantly, you also have to have the assessment and know where your gaps are and areas you should invest more, being it your wealth or your health. So that way, when you get to that marginal decade, you're set up for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, certainly when I was early in training, maybe a similar path for you guys is, I was working 80-hour weeks, and I thought all you had to do was to just work harder and earn more and hopefully save enough, and then neglect your health along the way. And then we realized, okay, well, I got to take care of my health as well. And so, I certainly would have benefited from a blueprint that could have been a model of how to balance both health and wealth.
What's been really interesting to see, I've been practicing for 20 years, and how the pendulum is swinging, and more people have this ideological or philosophical view towards actual long-term health and taking care of themselves.
At the end of the day, wealth without health and time, it just really isn't wealth to begin with anyway.
Very true.
So much of what we try to do is to try to build a sustainable path to financial health. And the more and more I've thought about financial health, I see a lot of parallels with physical health, especially when it comes to, when you learn a little bit about something, your confidence level goes through the roof. And then you start thinking and acting without all the information. And then as you learn more and more, you understand how little you actually really understand.
Yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
Health is an inherently incredibly complex field. It's very difficult without a lot of reading and a huge investment of time to really understand it at a deep level. And like you said, the more you know, the less you know sometimes in any area of science. At 10Squared, we're all about specificity of training. So this is about building a real framework, to your point, which is science-based. But it's training particularly through middle age for a golden age at the end of life in a way that's very specific. If you take any Olympic athlete a pole vaulter, a triathlete, a swimmer. They're all training. They're all training very, very specifically for their chosen sport. But the training looks completely different in each case. We would contend that training for life should be undertaken with a similar framework where you are not just selecting from any of the hundreds of tools that are out there in terms of training regimens or pieces of equipment or nutrition supplements, etc. But you should be taking a step back, thinking really carefully about your objectives for training. So objectives for today, also objectives for later in life. We have an exercise called the Centenarian Decathlon, which covers that. And then taking some time to assess where you are, assess where you want to be, put a strategic framework in place, and only then really think about the tools and the tactics that you're going to use to get there. We think it's impossible to arrive accidentally at the point where you're having an amazing physical life as an 85 or a 95-year-old. And the approach that we're really promoting is giving you reasons to train with real metrics, with a really specific regimen, real reasons to get out of bed and train in your 40s or your 50s or 60s, like a real athlete would, with a real goal in mind.
Yeah, I love that point because, I love using pro sports as an analogy, but, if I have this long-term goal, if I'm a pro athlete or if I'm someone who just wants to hike into my 80s or ski into my 80s, you also need true integration. And it really comes up to this idea of precision around the assessment, identifying gaps and weaknesses, and then creating a cohesive plan. So many people have certain activities they enjoy. So when we test them, they're really good at those activities. Maybe they're cyclists, so their cardiorespiratory is fantastic, but they're really set up to have a lot of muscle weakness, especially as they age. And so we really need to not only identify these gaps, but prioritize them with this long-term vision in mind, because short-term, there are always going to be needs, and we got to show up to work or we got to show up for our event. But in the big picture, if we're not working towards that end result, we're just going to actually burn a lot of effort with not a lot of outcome.
We've got a couple of slides on this, which we might show as well. The first will be familiar to anyone who's followed Peter Attia's work, a simple plot of health span versus lifespan. Of course, we all want to live a longer life. And I think by now we're pretty familiar with the idea that we want to fill those extra years with something worthwhile. But we don't always appreciate the trajectory of the decline through middle age. And you can see the blue line on this graph, which shows that our physical decline, in whatever metric it might be that you're tracking, it does begin relatively early in adult life. And people who have a long life, who have preserved physical capacity, they get the same diseases, they die of the same causes as everybody else, but they develop these processes much later in life. So this is the green curve that we can see on this graph. And we want something that replicates that, where we sustain all of our physical capacities on that horizontal green line for as long as possible and have a very short period of incapacity or illness at the end of life. The second slide that we've got demonstrates a little bit about the 10-squared approach, and we've referenced the marginal decade. We've referenced the fact this is not about just having an amazing marginal decade. It's actually about enjoying the benefits of physical health every day from now until that time. So we spend a lot of time assessing in close detail what are your physical capacities today, the blue dot on this graph. We want to spend a lot of time thinking about where you want to be in later life at 85 or 95 or 100 years old, and then establishing where the gaps are, establishing that new trajectory, the green line on this graph. And as we can see, taking our capacities to a whole new level for all of those days in between, whether you're motivated by a wonderful old age or you're just motivated by having a better life right now. The approach works. Exercise is the biggest tool that we have in the toolkit for multiple measures of health or wellness, and correlations against prevention of all types of disease in all types of body systems.
I really love, Luke, how you framed that in a way of objective strategy and tactics. That is a very scientific approach that that really resonates with us as well. And at Apta, we try to do the same thing from a physical health perspective, to have your wealth span far exceed your lifespan. And so, we spend a lot of our early years accumulating active income with the goal that our passive income or our investments will eventually join that line to meet your lifestyle threshold. And passive income is that antidote to allowing you to be less reliant on your active income and have this, financial freedom zone. And what we found is that if you're able to use that same type of scientific methodology that you use for your physical health, because those things don't happen by accident, right? You mentioned earlier, you don't arrive at 80, 85 and being nimble. There are maybe a few genetic anomalies, and if
a couple of unicorns.
Yeah, right? So if you happen to be part of that lucky sperm club, I guess kudos to you. But most of us are going to have to be intentional, and we have to be intentional about our financial health as well. One of the things that I've seen is that investors who are able to be very, very diligent about using their active income and the proceeds from their active income and putting that into a passive income bucket that is tax deferred or low risk, diversified portfolio, allows you to accelerate that passive income curve. And so when you accelerate that passive income curve, you're less reliant on your active income. You can actually have less active income and still meet your lifestyle threshold. And not only that, you can actually increase your whole financial freedom threshold. So it really dovetails to what we've been talking about with physical health. If you've got your financial health in order, you can actually take advantage of the opportunities that your physical body will be able to perform.
Yeah, totally. What I see all the time is people don't have a state of readiness with their body. And then they'll go play basketball with their kid and they'll strain a muscle or they'll hurt themselves. And that's really kind of frustrating because they want to enjoy their life. They want to spend time with their child. And then here they are, they got injured. And all of this it's the same overlap, right? It's like, get your fundamentals right, get your foundations set, don't have any gaps, and then build over time. And then that makes a big difference for somebody over 10 or 20 years.
There were two concepts you alluded to there, which I think are very powerful, Vasu. The first word you mentioned was capacity, and I think whether it's health or wealth, you're talking about building capacity. And Kyla, maybe you can talk more to muscles and bones and other capacities that we need to build, but also the power of compounding over time. Exercise, the investment in your physical health, the earlier in life you start, the more opportunity you have for compounding those gains, building those capacities and enjoying all the benefits of that later in life. We will take anybody with any injury history at any age and any fitness level at 10 Squared. It's never too late to start. Yeah. But if you really want to harness the compounding effect, as you well know, the earlier you start, the better.
It's really fascinating. That's the eighth wonder of the world, right? Compounding.
Yeah.
And the first time I remember learning about compounding, I was blown away as to, everything's kind of starts really, really small. You don't have a huge trajectory, and then all of a sudden you let that compound, and after you pass that inflection point, everything goes up like this. Yeah. It's almost a geometric, and it almost seems like it's not real.
Right.
Warren Buffett has a saying that's like, he invests for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. He finds good companies and invest for a long time and let that long runway and that compounding take effect. So I want to dive down into a little bit more of the specifics and the pillars of longevity. So Kyler, I'd love to have you expound a little bit more on, we talk about stability, cardiorespiratory fitness, strength, and injury prevention, mm-hmm. being the kind of the pillars of longevity. Share with us a little bit more about your perspective about how to cohesively put all this stuff together and operationalize that, because we want this to be a actionable discussion for both of our communities. So share with us some insights on how you put that together, how you conceptualize, how you think about that.
I love that question because I think there's so much information out there now, and very well-intentioned individuals are trying to answer that same question. Should I be doing strength? Should I be doing more core? Should I be doing more bike riding? Like, what do I do, right? And I think the first part of it is it starts with a really detailed assessment to know who you are as an individual. A lot of us are genetically really good at certain things. We're drawn to certain things. But what's really interesting with the data, and then what we've already seen with our clients at 10Squared, is some people are naturally elite at one thing. We also know demographically what humans get, right? Like if you can pull up some stats on a male over 45, we know that Achilles is on the list. We know that lower neck pain is on the list. Some very specific demographic studies that we just know that are inherent to the Western human experience, right? And then you multiply that by that person's personal history. Did they hurt their ankle in high school? Do they have back issues, stuff like that? Once you've done that exercise, and then you're thinking through the framework that you alluded to of all these different criteria of being healthy, of strength, mobility, cardiorespiratory fitness, all these things, you can start to prioritize, right? Because we've had some clients where they had issues that we caught that actually ended up needing a surgery, and we facilitated their rehab. But more importantly, we collaborated with the cardiorespiratory team and the strength team. So we trained around that. And that has already made such a big difference for those clients, because typically in the old school model, those people would have a shoulder surgery. They wouldn't do a lot. Well, we've had one client where he actually enhanced his VO2 max almost 5 or 6 points while he was rehabbing his shoulder. And so that specificity and dialing in the priorities early is huge to build those foundations. But on the whole, if the broad strokes, I think everyone should really understand that they have to build strength and muscle volume as they get older. And you want to really set yourself up just like a savings account. You want to put a lot of muscle on your body as much as you can, because sarcopenia, or the slow deterioration of muscle over time, is a known truth, right? So everyone needs to be doing some version of strength training. How that looks can be different. And like I said, it can be molded around that person's preferences and things like that. Another big one is fall risk. A lot of us don't appreciate it, but maybe we've unfortunately had some loved ones who did have a fall, and that can really correlate to, morbidity risk and also just overall life experience. So looking for people's fall risk is a big deal, and that can translate to single leg stability, balance exercises, things like that. But when you really zoom out, you want to make sure the cardiorespiratory fitness is great, because it's such a big killer in our society. And then you really want to set people up, not just for the things they want to do. Like, we really want to make sure that the centenarian decathlon is a focus, like who they want to be. But life will throw stuff at you that you're not ready for. And so you're a great example. I know you wouldn't mind me talking about you, is your posture and your work posture of having to work on everybody at the nose and throat level required certain movements and certain repetitive stresses that put stress into your spine. Furthermore, you're a little bit more set up for that just because your dad had some spinal issues and things like that. And so what was unfortunate for you is that didn't really show up until you started training for the marathon. And that's what usually happens. It's never the one event that causes an injury when it's a repetitive stress. Is this thing has been a slow build over time, and then we push ourselves to another level where it creates this flare up. Nothing is more frustrating for me or the individual who's trying to do the best for themselves, and then an injury gets in the way. And I think understanding that a lot of these things can be seen on an assessment is something that a lot of people don't understand. And so when we did your assessment, we knew about your history, of course, but we also saw that your thoracic spine didn't move well, especially in extension, and you're putting extra force in your lower neck. And so as we started training you and putting more strength on you, we actually discovered another little flare up on the right side just because of that kind of movement asymmetry. So we actually had to regress you a little bit because we want to do more foundational work to remove the stress out of your neck so you can actually train and build how you want to. But a lot of people don't understand. They just think you just got to keep pushing through and keep pushing through. But the key is the assessment to know what is not only maybe an injury, but also what could be connected to that injury that's creating extra stress.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because when you want to be very intentional about your approach, it does take a lot of diagnostic testing and a tailored plan based upon that. And it, quite honestly, it's a lot of deep work.
Yeah.
That is often, not very glamorous.
Totally. Every time. But people know that, right? Like getting A's in undergrad, it wasn't glamorous, but you had to show the discipline. You didn't go to the parties, you studied, right?
So it's the same thing with investing. Like, if you've got to make sure that your investment strategy matches your objectives and your risk tolerance to be able to, really achieve a fruitful outcome.
Yeah. And there is a time to push. There is a time for some risk, right? Like when you have an athlete that we have a client that trained really hard and worked really hard. She's doing the Boston Marathon this weekend, right? She's going to go for it hell or high water, and she's going to push hard. And that's great. There's a time and place for that. But we also know that we've built that foundation. We've done all the little work along the way. So everyone on our team is just really excited because we know she's going to do great.
It's a risk mitigation strategy.
Totally.
And you can apply that to almost any aspect of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
So Luke, you've worked with multiple Formula One racers, and I'd be really curious to see your thoughts on what average physicians and investors can take away from elite performance athletes that you've worked with.
Formula One, it really is the world's most interesting and expensive circus. There's some incredible overlaps with your average business professional towards the life of someone who's traveling within Formula One, not just the drivers, but the entire teams around each driver. So it's a very human business. People perceive Formula One as a technological pursuit, as something which is based heavily in engineering and science and is achieving almost perfection in those areas. But on so many levels, it's just about the human beings that are running the cars, designing the cars, driving them, executing this amazingly complicated travel schedule. And so, like any really busy business executive or doctor, this comes down to simple things like sleep and nutrition, having a real purpose in what you're doing. We talked about that a lot with the athletes and indeed with the teams as well. Everybody's general medical health, of course, comes into it. As a doctor traveling with that circus, you kind of become everybody's family doctor. We're away 20, 30 weeks per year. So by definition, nobody really has that much time to look after their health in the traditional way at their home base with their primary care physician. So some really fascinating parallels there. A very, very human sport. And I think now accessing a much wider American audience, that human element has actually become much more well known through things like Drive to Survive on Netflix and a different social media strategy and a very much a changing demographic for the average Formula One fan. So the human story is actually much more interesting in enhancing all of that you see around the racing on track. The other really fascinating thing about Formula One, and there are some parallels to this in business and in life as well, it's concurrently both a team sport and an individual sport in the same event, in the same day. Mm-hmm. And so the drivers are competing to the death to win races and to win world championships. And it's such a difficult thing to win a Formula One world championship, even once, to win a Formula One race. So many years go into that pursuit. But at the same time, it's a team sport. Each of these drivers are at the apex of the work of 1,000 or 2,000 people who are all relying on them to execute. And those two agendas, the team and the individual sport, can actually come into conflict sometimes at critical points in a race weekend or at a championship. And there's a lot of drama and emotion and diplomacy that comes like in any good business executive life, like we experience as doctors looking after patients. We're often balancing competing ethical and outcome variables along the way. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
So many challenges, so much to unwrap there. But one of the things that I really took away from that is that there is a tremendous power in being proactive, and there is a significant cost of being reactive. Have you noticed that in your career as well?
Yes. And I think doctors are pretty good at doing this in their professional lives, but perhaps not so great at this sometimes in their personal and their financial lives. I had my own ups and downs in the property market through my 20s, 30s, my own financial near-death experiences. I look back now and think at the amazing property I could own outright if I hadn't pushed that one purchase too far and made those little mistakes along the way. But, we all have these chapters in our lives, I think, and doctors are very prone to this. We're blessed with a healthy, comfortable income a lot of the time. We think we're amazing property investors during boom periods, and more often than not, we're handed a lesson at some point. And we come to that realization often far too late, as we do through other life experiences, that sometimes it actually is just a great idea to have a real process and a real professional on your side guiding you through these areas of expertise that you don't necessarily possess or have been trained in a formal way.
Yeah, I love that idea. It reminds me of one story I had with a pro golfer where he herniated a disc in his back about 5 weeks before the Masters. And he had sponsor pressure. At the time, he was a very highly ranked player. And we worked with him every day for about 4.5 weeks. We didn't let him touch a driver. About 2 weeks before the Masters, we let him start using his like lesser clubs, like half swings. And we kept going with this premise of, you already have these skills. You don't need to push the risk now. We're going to risk it at the event, right? The goal is to get to the event. And so he was shocked at how well he played and how well he performed because he was rested. He was just healed up. He wasn't constantly pursuing that high risk thing the whole time. Because if you drive a car and redline the transmission every day, you're going to wear out the brakes and wear out the transmission really fast. So there needs to be this balance of risk at the right time, but also like thinking, okay, now's the time to pull back or build the foundation or whatever it could be.
And another great example of having really good professionals on your side telling you when's a good time to do that.
We still joke, we're still close friends, but I always said the best friend is the one who will tell you that shirt looks terrible on you, right? Like you don't get to hit the driver today because you'll get in your own way.
Yeah, the truth will set you free, right?
Yeah.
The truth will set you free. And I've seen that as well. It's like sometimes you have an altered sense of reality, and knowing the truth and being honest, not seeing it better than it is or worse than it is, but as it is, becomes super, super essential to make educated decisions about a path moving forward, and allowing you to systematically kind of reduce risk in everything you do. You know, this really hits home because we had a local surgeon who, let's call him Michael, who was exceptional at taking care of his health. Exercised, ate right, all the vitamins and minerals, regular checkups, very proactive in regards to his health, but not so much with his finances. And he was skiing in his 80s, to give you an idea of how healthy he was, or is, but also didn't have his financial house in order and couldn't support his lifestyle without working, without having active income. And it was just really, really sad to see, because it's like, okay, well, you had everything else going for you, but if you don't manage all aspects of your life and try to mitigate risk in everything, including your finances, it becomes a challenge. And so, in trying to communicate that, one of the things that we've talked about is like this surgical wheel of wealth, where if you think about just a regular wheel, it has multiple different quadrants to it, and each one of those quadrants has to be filled to a certain point, otherwise the wheel doesn't move. And so your stories really illustrate the importance of balance, like you mentioned, in all areas of our life, and taking a very holistic approach, not just focusing on your health, not just focusing on your wealth, not just focusing on your relationships, your spirituality, your relationships, your financial health, your emotional health. It all goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know all the details, but if he would have had a better strategy, he may have ended up in a very different place.
We have this incredible luxury as human beings where for most of human history, we did go to war or work or gather food until the day we died, right? We now have this longevity. We're now adding the health span. We have this unbelievable opportunity for something called a happy, fulfilled retirement. And, there's this idea that if we were able to live indefinitely, every accidental death becomes an exponentially greater tragedy. And you could make a similar analogy to the idea that we have this opportunity for a great fulfilled retirement, and we should really structure our lives in a way that we can take advantage of that.
In our world, we often talk about real estate as a lever to increase our time flexibility and passive income that extends that financial independence window, especially given as physicians, we have a lot of unique attributes, and in terms of being creditworthy and having a good reputation and a good income. So we try to use those levers for our community to unlock the potential of real estate using your unique competitive advantages. So in your world, Luke, what are some levers that you can use to unlock that same level of autonomy?
We're lucky in the exercise world to have some pretty good and well-proven science now. And what I would say is that science is becoming more and more accessible. Let's take advantage of that. So we love a good integral variable. VO2 max is the classic. So to have a great VO2 max, you've got to have good heart and lungs, good oxygen carrying capacity, good mitochondrial function at the muscle. This is a number worth knowing. We talk about investment. It's a small investment to go to a lab or to come to a program like 10Squared to measure that metric on a regular basis, to know what your zone 2 threshold is, so that when you are investing an hour in training, you're training in the correct zone, you're exercising the right cellular machinery. These small investments can actually can lever and amplify the other things that you're doing. A DEXA scan is a relatively trivial thing, knowing your body composition, watching how those things change over time. We have access to this science now. We have a lot of accumulated knowledge in these areas, and it just makes sense to take a little bit of time to get to know where you are situated, and when you're starting out on that health and fitness journey.
Yeah, Luke, I think that's a great way to look at it, because you want to just set yourself up for success and have these foundations. And I always correlate it to, if you watch, Steph Curry's the best shooter of all time, and every day he goes to the gym, he'll take 40 shots 2 inches from the rim. He's working on those foundations, right? Well, in my world, in the injury prevention world, it's all about having a stable frame to put muscle on and to put fitness on and compete off of. And so if I could go back and tell every athlete I've ever had at age 12, yes, you need core strength, but more specifically, you need to have core strength in all planes of motion. And you definitely want to have a spine that can be stiff, but also a spine that can actually be dynamic and control, because injury kind of always shows up where we take our body to ranges that we can't control or we don't have the capacity to resist. So that is my biggest take home from the MSK world, is having that chassis that's really solid. Then we start to put speed and muscle and fitness on top of that.
And then tying it all together. We're really lucky at 10Squared to almost self-select a membership where people are genuinely interested in exercise. Yeah. Our members almost always come to us with a strong history. It may be that they love the gym. It may be that they're an endurance athlete, but we find there are always these fundamental foundations to build. And the real value add is in tying the whole program together, the right balance of those different components, addressing very specifically the gaps that we find. And when that machine starts to really hum, it's a powerful thing to behold, the impacts and the gains that people can make.
Yeah, I've seen that with so many members of our community, that when they get their house in order and they're really clicking on all these cylinders that we talk about with the wheel of wealth, it's a beautiful sight. It's a beautiful sight, and hopefully this will encourage all of us to kind of reevaluate our own journeys and figure out how we can optimize our personal wheels of wealth.
Well, one thing you said yesterday too, when we were talking casually, was about once you get your house in order, the community impact is immeasurable. Like if someone's spending their time trying to scramble and catch up or patch holes, they're not really helping their community. They're not serving others. And that's always one of the most valuable experiences in life, is serving others. And I think it starts with getting your fitness and your house in order so you can actually help and serve others.
Yeah, and in both of our communities, especially with the healthcare providers, you can really amplify the effects of that. When you have your house in order, you become much more of a compassionate, empathetic clinician. Yeah. And the ripple effect with the community is really heartwarming to see.
It's okay to put your own oxygen oxygen mask on first, but hopefully your VO2 max is good enough that you can
you buy yourself at least 10 seconds. Yeah.
All right. So as we kind of land this plane, I've got one final question for you all. if you could go back and tell your younger self, we're all in middle age now and we've had accumulated life lessons. It's always kind of refreshing to kind of think back, to see what you would tell your younger self. Not that we can go back and change the past, but we may be a resource for a younger person that looks at us, each of us, as perhaps mentors, that we can provide some value to the next generation. So what would you tell your younger self, Luke?
For me, it's just about consistency. It's just about turning up each day. It's about accumulating small wins, small efforts over time. Winning a world championship or winning in the game of life, it's more about how bad your bad days are than how good your good days are. And it's just so powerful to keep turning up.
Yeah, he kind of stole mine. I think winning the attendance award, or I would almost say give yourself that grace and don't be so critical. Not every workout needs to be epic and worthy of a Nike commercial, but give me someone who shows up 350 days a year to the gym, even if it's a light workout. Give me that person versus the person who has this boom bust experience where they go hard for a month and then they hurt their back, and then they go hard for another month, they hurt their leg. And that boom bust cycle is really hard to stay on that roller coaster. Consistency and giving yourself the grace and not putting the pressure on that every workout needs to be just the most incredible thing ever.
I would really say that it's about building a team. It's you can only go so far as an individual. Humans are social creatures, and the more we can build a team around us that we trust and we know are looking after each of our own best interest, helping other people in their blind spots and having other people help you in your blind spots, and building a team of people who have domain expertise in each of those different facets of your life, you can go further much faster.
Yeah,
team victory is a very fulfilling thing.
And I didn't realize that earlier on. I thought I could do it all myself.
Sure. Well, high achievers are usually wired that way, right? They're used to the self-reliance and they'll do whatever it takes to get it done. But actually finding blind spots is a really cool way to look at it.
Well, fellas, I've really enjoyed our time together. We've been able to learn more about each other and an application of what we talked about in each of our own individual lives. And I'm sure our community, both of our communities, will have access to this and hopefully spurn some thoughts in their own head about how they can apply some of these principles and foundations that we discussed in each of their own lives.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Vasu.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. As we wrap up today's conversation, we hope it sparks something deeper about the kind of life you want to build, not just in terms of years, but in terms of vitality, freedom, and impact. 10Squared focuses on helping you move with purpose, stay strong as you age, and invest in your health in ways that pay dividends far beyond the gym. At Apta Investment Group, we share the similar philosophy. Your wealth span should support your health span. That means building passive income and time freedom so you can move, travel, serve, and enjoy the decades ahead on your own terms. If what you've heard today connects, we invite you to take the next step. Learn more about 10Squared's personalized approach to movement longevity at 10squared.com. Also take a minute to complete the self-assessment below. It's the first step in aligning your health span and your wealth span. Once you're done, you'll receive bonus resources tailored to support your goals. So let's keep this conversation going. The choices you make today create a life of freedom, purpose, and longevity for tomorrow.